Andy Ingamells and Seán Clancy. Over to you.
Thanks, Richard, and thanks everybody else for joining us today. Myself and Andy are going to give you a pretty standard presentation about our piece, Antonio Guillem, so I'll just start. Andy Ingamells and I have been composing and performing as a duo since 2019. Our practice has developed organically through conversation, like critique, and experimentation through doing. We trust each other implicitly, and within the tiny micro-society of our duo, there are no bad ideas. If one of us dislikes an idea, then we must suggest an alternative rather than dismissing it. Through this process, we have arrived at a current practice of visual musique concrète, a term we use to describe work that foregrounds the images of performance situations, and sonification happens as the result of a particular and perhaps unusual performance environment. For example, our first piece, This Is About, involved us dissecting changes to our lives around 2018 and 2019 through a performance involving the Irish sport of hurling, a synthesizer and vocoder, a piano, field recordings, and spoken word. Our second piece, Nowhere Better Than This Place, saw Andy building a wall in real time around me using a trowel, a contact mic, salto, and hundreds of lever arch boxes taken from a music library, whilst I played slow, sustained chords on a synthesizer. Our work is somewhat diaristic. The creative and collaborative process is the content in some sense. For example, in This Is About, the spoken text describes the process getting better at hurling, reflecting on sounds of freestyling, whilst in Nowhere Better Than This Place, it involved us negotiating an unusual performance within the CMC in Dublin, conversations about pointing mics at things and sound art, and concerns about housing. This diaristic element is especially true of our third piece and the topic of this paper, Antonio Guillem. In early 2020, we began to develop our third and as yet unrealized piece, which was inspired by John Baldessari's Beethoven's Trumpet with Ear. The concept for this piece was to involve the close physical proximity of performers and audience, with the music bleeding from cheap headphones worn by us whilst we rolled wall paint on the floor. Like many other performances the world over, the premiere, and by the same token, further development on this piece was shelved due to COVID-19 restrictions. However, like many of our musician colleagues, we had some decisions to make. We could take time out, reflect upon the unprecedented situation we all found ourselves in. Perhaps a global pandemic is not the best time to create art. We could also respond to the situation, and when maybe not embracing the new world we found ourselves in, we found that it presented an opportunity to explore a different and very unique way to collaborate that was experimental and could perhaps lead to a new practice, or at least a new component in a broader methodology. In this paper, we hope to demonstrate how the conceptualization, compositional process, and performance of Antonio Guillem might be seen as a holistic networked collaboration, how it might offer a new element to our duo practice, and how it might be seen as embodying our lived experience through COVID-19. On the 11th of May 2020, at roughly 12:30, Andy sent me the following text on Twitter. The lady in red is Van de Leer and Deep reports 4 devices for achieving art world prestige. The boyfriend is using these 4 devices in the form of memes to create the text for the piece. The girlfriend is using an honest and creative way to create the text. I did immediately comprehend what had happened and tried to respond wittedly with, haha, it seems I am the girlfriend in this case. Andy responded with, the lady in red is Seán's level-headed response. The distracted boyfriend is Andy. The disgusted girlfriend is Andy's self-referential inner self that always looks for an easy solution. To which I replied, the lady in red is creating online content. The boyfriend is musicians. The disgusted girlfriend is concerts in real life. And thus we began a very public composition process on Twitter that would last for the next month or so. Of course, I was not completely taken by surprise by Andy's Twitter prompt. We had discussed before art world prestige and that it might be fun to create an online piece that was loosely based on the distracted boyfriend meme using a stock photo by the photographer Antonio Guillem, which began appearing on the internet around 2017. However, as with most of our pieces together, what we would do after Andy's initial prompt or image suggestion would be chiseled out over time, discussed through the act of doing.
Thanks for that there, Seán. So I'm just going to then talk about some of the compositional and performance elements of this piece, Antonio Guillem. So working remotely over an extended period of time, Seán and I developed several different compositional elements. These consisted of a Twitter text, a structure, paper marionettes, child's toy maracas, and musical typing, as well as performance speech, and bringing all these things together to think about how the piece might look over Zoom. So the Twitter text, let me just pull up this slide here. You can see the Twitter text. This became the main semantic content for the piece and also functioned as the piece's durational structure. This didn't really reveal itself until a little later on in the compositional process. We created the Twitter text in public via social media. We both use Twitter daily and sometimes communicate our ideas to each other in that space before transferring to email or video discussions. In doing this, other people, specifically other musicians in our field, began to participate by adding their own versions of the meme text as replies to our tweets, or by simply telling us that this public process was irritating. And you can see this on the right-hand side of the slide there. These interventions sometimes became part of the Twitter text in the piece. We didn't have to put out a public call for participation. The participation happened organically as part of the creative process. This compositional approach relates to this notion of composition as lived experience. Our friendship and colleagueship is part of our lived experience, and this enters the creative process in various ways. For instance, the idea to use this distracted boyfriend meme in the first place came about when we were sharing a meal together with our families, where Seán, wanting to avoid getting out his phone at the dinner table, decided instead to verbally describe a version of the meme that he'd seen online. The way that this meme labels each of the characters is in a way reminiscent of Forced Entertainment's 1993 piece 12 AM Awake and Looking Down. I shall also just put the link for that in the chat that you can feel free to check out another time. Actually, I'll have to do that once I've finished screen sharing. In that piece, Forced Entertainment used a stack of cardboard signs and a box of jumble sale clothes to present loads of different characters over the course of a 6-hour performance. And having the text for our piece delivered via the chat, we thought echoed the use of subtitles on TV or surtitles in opera, even though it wasn't accompanying any sung text. For Seán, this also has to do with his own work with projected text. And when I experience Seán's projected text pieces, I'm often reminded of 19th century program music with the text outlining a narrative that the music might also be suggesting. Thinking about the structure of this piece, this is, I'll just bring up another slide to show you a little bit about what the elements of the piece and what it might have looked like online. If you look in the middle of the slide, you can see what the piece might have looked like online. Now, the piece is structured in a way that mirrors the process of its creation. The Twitter text was created in public in real time over the course of 28 days. That was when me and Seán were tweeting back and forth to each other. The 30 minutes of the performance then represented this 28-day period of tweeting. And this is a strategy that I've previously employed in one of my works, Piano Recital, where a 3-month preparation period and rehearsal was translated into a 60-minute structure with events taking place over the course of 3 months, mapped proportionally onto the duration of 60 minutes. Seán also translates real-world durations into music, such as the duration of a flight from Dublin to Birmingham in Ireland and England, one of his pieces that can be seen on YouTube. As a duo, we've employed a similar strategy in This Is About, which takes the duration of half a hurling game and translates it into a performance. This approach gave us a framework or mould into which we could pour content or material, and we'll outline that below. This might be considered a modified approach to John Cage's early thoughts on structure, as outlined in 1949 in his article, Forerunners of Modern Music. Let me just pull up this here. Another element of the piece was paper marionettes. I designed and made 3 paper marionettes on the likenesses of the 3 models in the distracted boyfriend meme. Randomly placed in front of a camera lens, these marionettes became not only visual material for the video, but also functioned as a video score for Seán to follow in his performance on toy maracas. The position of the marionettes on screen was random, but the order in which they appeared was determined by the pattern of each tweet. The 6 possible permutations of the tweet pattern relating to the girlfriend, boyfriend, lady in red, girlfriend, lady in red, boyfriend, lady in red, boyfriend, girlfriend, etc., etc. This element of the piece is about performing with images or using images in performance as a score, which I discussed in a 2019 paper presented at the Tenor conference in Melbourne. In that paper, which can be found online, I'm interested in reframing notation so that it becomes an integral part of the physical theatre of musical performance, rather than something hidden behind a music stand or completely removed through memorization. In Antonio Guillem, I slid the marionettes across the table, and Seán read this by placing the 3 maracas in corresponding positions on his own table. And you can see this happening in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide there. Much like I wanted to use the imagery of paper marionettes, Seán wanted to use 3 of his child's maracas. Serendipitously, there are 3 models in the photo and 3 maracas, so the maracas follow as closely as possible the movement of the paper marionettes from one camera to the other. Once the maracas are in situ, Seán plays a cyclic chance-determined pattern written in cipher notation. And if I just pull out here, you can see on the left hand of the slide the toy maracas there. We employed musical typing by typing out the Twitter text using GarageBand's MIDI musical keyboard function, using 4 pre-selected sounds, which were 70s clavinova, harp, percussion, and bass guitar. I cycled through these 4 settings, changing the setting whenever there was a break in the Twitter text. A break is a period where we were not in communication with each other over Twitter. On some days, we were regularly tweeting back and forth to each other. On other days, we might only tweet once or twice, and sometimes there were gaps of several days. These breaks or rests would become places in the piece where I would alter the MIDI sounds for the musical typing, and a large break towards the end of the creative process, a break of 9 days, gave us the opportunity to introduce a contrasting element into the piece, which I'll discuss below. This musical typing technique led to a recurring musical motif appearing throughout the piece, the sound of the word "the" being typed at the beginning of each sentence, F sharp being the T key in GarageBand, A natural being the H key, and D sharp being the E key, which outlined a kind of D sharp diminished triad. The overall effect was quite staccato, which you'll hear when we play an extract of the piece, because there was no cause for me to press the sustain tab, the sustain key, which is the tab key. Additionally, the velocity and dynamic range tended to decrease over time as the result of the C key being pressed, which reduces the velocity. Contrariwise, the V key increases volume, but this suggests that Seán and I use more C's than V's in our tweets. I also find myself typing in a more musical way when performing this piece live over Zoom. I would lift my fingers at the end of each sentence, perhaps like a pianist or percussionist might do at the end of a phrase. The musical typing wasn't synchronized with the text appearing in the chat, and the MIDI notes were sounding as the result of the musical typing was intentionally obfuscated. Perhaps the audience were able to infer this throughout the piece, especially when the performed speech was introduced 20 minutes into the performance. Speaking of the performed speech, 20 minutes into this piece I cease the musical typing and enunciate the Twitter text instead, while Seán plays an accompanying drone on synthesizer. This section lasts for around 9 minutes and was the equivalent break in the Twitter exchange, as I mentioned above. This 9-minute section presented us with an opportunity to create a moment that exists outside of the logic of the piece that we'd set up, more like a wild card, something that helps maintain the spontaneity of the work. Ironically, this moment of surprise in the piece became the thing that we'd normally do, with much of my own work involving the declamation of speech in some way, and much of Seán's recent approach involving long sustained tones on synthesizers. In this case, I enunciate the words as I type, which creates a halting and irregular speaking rhythm that might be considered musically interesting. Alongside this spoken text and Seán's FM drone, there's a 9-minute film of a vegetable stock cube gradually disintegrating in a saucepan of boiling water, which is perhaps a visual pun on the stock image that is the foundation of this piece. Additionally, the image of the rectangular stock cube mirrors the rectangular cube of a laptop screen and the rectangular Zoom windows in which the audience would experience the performance. Now, as with many of our colleagues, we decided to use some of the functions of Zoom as a way to present the piece. Seán and I began our discussions for creating the piece by talking a lot about online performances. Neil Luck's article, The Great Compression, came up quite a lot, which was written for the Sampler in about April last year. as did an artist talk that I participated in via Instagram Live with Philippine Huchen for Onomatopoeia Gallery. That artist talk was for the launch of Philippine's new book, but instead of showing her face and talking to camera, she had the camera pointed at her desk while slowly leafing through the different pages of the book. These pages contain graphic scores, short bold text, slogans, text scores, and other bits of writing that could be clearly read by the viewers. I was attracted to this way of using video technology and suggested something like it to Seán. As well as this, doing the performance through Zoom, users could experience text through the chat and also have the opportunity to interact if they decided to do so, which added an improvisatory element to the performance. In the first performance, my mother tried to add text to the chat while she was watching the piece, trying to also join in with the meme format. But she did them privately rather than to the whole group or audience. And in this situation, Zoom automatically sets the response to the person who sends messages, meaning that Seán had a difficult time having to quickly flip between private responses to my mother and whole group responses, adding an element of unplanned jeopardy to the performance. Additionally, in Zoom, users could pin a single screen, such as the toy maracas or paper marionette choreography video, or they could pin our own screens. And we could also share screens and audio from different locations. The performance on Zoom afforded us the opportunity to present both live and pre-recorded material. For example, Seán copy-pasting the Twitter text into the chat, my musical typing on GarageBand, my spoken text, and Seán's FM drones were all performed live, whilst the video showing the paper marionettes, toy maracas, and stock cube were all pre-recorded and shared with the audience as a pinned screen. Finally, presenting this work on Zoom enabled us both to perform in two different locations, Cork for me and Dublin for Seán, whilst all of our audience joined us from multiple individual locations, mostly in the UK and continental Europe. Is this piece a document of a certain time? Yeah, I think it is, because the creative process, both the writing of the Twitter text and the content of that text, and the performance all reflected the conditions of the spring 2020 lockdowns. So before going into our conclusion, we thought it might be useful to show a short excerpt of the piece. So I'm just going to stop sharing the screen there for a second. And I'm going to pull up a video sharing website called Watch Together. And I'm just going to put the link there in the chat. So if you'd like to click on that link there, and then we can all go into this Watch Together room, and then I can play an extract of the piece just for 1.5 minutes. I can see a few people arriving in the room now, and I'll press play.
Hi folks, thanks for that. So to conclude, we hope that by taxonomizing the compositional process of this work, that we've made it clear how it might be considered an example of an holistic approach to network collaboration, where all parts of the piece are intimately interconnected by their networked existence and explicable only by reference to the whole. To recapitulate, we did this by generating our text online through Twitter, using a meme to structure the text, using the real-time duration of text composition as a durational structure for the performance of the piece, and finally by delivering the performance online through Zoom. Throughout the whole process, we were intrinsically linked through a remote network that was at times private and at other times very, very public, all the while thinking about how this piece would exist online, using Zoom as both a compositional and performance space, as opposed to us simply pre-recording a performance and presenting it online. Nevertheless, we can't claim unique innovation in this situation, as we were, like many other artists, simply responding to the situation that COVID-19 had initiated. However, rather than this being a radical departure for us, it might perhaps be considered an extension of the work we are already doing. As noted in our introduction, this piece was devised with all of our decisions being arrived at collaboratively. We used elements from both of our individual practices. This work is also an example of a visual music concrete, where all sounds arise out of the images associated with the performance situation. Nevertheless, there are some things that we found useful during this process that may find their way into subsequent work, such as a very public composition process and network performance in real life performances. Much as we might like to, whether there is valor in erasing the work of 2020, 2021 remains to be seen. Moreover, and perhaps above all else, this work reflects composition as a lived experience, not only through the compositional process outlined above, but also in the fact that it is a DIY, no budget response to us living through the first incarnation of COVID restrictions. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Seán. That's great. And yes, Andy, if you wouldn't mind, stop sharing screen, that's great. Thanks both. So I can see a question coming in already, so please do type other questions you have, folks, in, because we will return to these questions at the end of all four of the presentations in the full Q&A at the end of this session. So thanks again to Seán and Andy. We'll go straight on to Andrea Andrich and others, because this is a group performance. So Andrea, over to you.
Oh, okay. Now I'm there. Hello. So I just say a couple of words by way of introduction. So our project is called Concert for Smartphone Network. And the main idea behind it is a system for performing together a loop-based electronic music work. It was not initially necessarily thought of as performing remotely, but it just turned out to work. But the key idea behind it is to not transmit sound between the players, but to create a messaging system that will tell each instrument who is doing what, and then to resynthesize all the music on each of the instruments, and in that way to mitigate the delay issues. Also, the loop-based structure, like this overly minimalist approach, also helps with that, because when a change happens in anybody's flow, whether it happens after 5th or after 7th repetition of the loop, it doesn't matter that much. So the structure of the music also helps. We exist as an ensemble for already 1.5 years and have been performing quite regularly in the past year. There was a lot of interest. So we perform either a laptop-based work or a smartphone-based work, and generally smartphones are interesting because they are handheld and they make it possible for you to move while you play. Okay, so I will now switch off my image and set us up to perform. And get ready; it will be very loud. Hi. I hope we didn't go out of time.
No, you're okay. Did you have any concluding thoughts, or are you all finished there?
I can show you the interface that we have.
Well, actually, Andrea, what we'll do is we've got some questions about process and some things to do with the visualization as well. So perhaps that could be in the Q&A at the end of the session, if that's okay.
Yes, agreed. Thank you.
All right, Andrea and your fellow performers, thank you very much. Some really positive responses in the comments.
Nice.
I'm just going to give people's ears half a minute to reach in for the next presentation. Please do ask any other questions as well in the chat that we can pick up on later. And we will continue on with our next presentation with Rachel Beckles-Wilson and Lynn Lee. I'll hand over to you both now.
Okay, hello. Is the sound working?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So thanks very much to the organisers for this really fascinating conference. It's great to be part of it. And I'm a musician and musicologist. I have done 20 years in academia as a kind of standard scholar, but I left in 2019, just in time for the pandemic, to focus more on creative practice. And I work freelance while being affiliated to the Royal Northern in Manchester and also SOAS. And Lynn, would you like to say something about you?
Right, I'm Lynn Lee. I live in Scotland. My background was actually in teaching academic research as well, but I started developing creative visual arts practice some years ago. And in the last 10 years, I've been making short experimental videos and also standalone sound pieces. Rachel and I started collaborating last year during the lockdown, and we got to know each other through a mutual friend who shared some of my works with her. And afterwards, she invited me to collaborate. And we had hardly met each other before that. I mean, I only met her very, very briefly when she came up to give a couple of talks about her work. But I said, yes, I'd like to collaborate, and our collaboration has turned out to be really positive and productive. And so far we've completed 3 pieces of work and have been working on a few more, including the one that we are presenting today. And in the other works, our roles are fairly clearly divided, with Rachel providing the music and me dealing with the visuals and the editing. Like in 2 of the completed works, they started with music that Rachel had composed, and then I created the visuals and made the videos. And one of the and then another one which started with some footage which I gave to Rachel, and also some sound recording of protests in Hong Kong, where I came from. And then Rachel created music for that. But in the project that we're going to present today is we both contribute to the visuals and sounds, and so the roles are not so clearly defined. So Rachel is going to talk about that, and we also will share some videos during the process. So I'll pass it to Rachel.
Yeah, so I'm sharing my screen now, and I hope that's going to work fine, just as it did before. Is it working?
Yes, we can see that. Yes,
Okay.
That's fine.
Perfect. So I was looking for a way to develop our collaboration in a direction that was more interactive, rather than one of us completing half the work and then the other completing the other half, and then it being kind of agreed and done. I wanted something more participatory on both sides. I was also really feeling very much at sea with the COVID crisis, and I wanted to be reaching forward into the unknown in collaboration with somebody else, so that I could really participate poetically with somebody else in what seemed to be quite a major reconfiguration of the public and the private, and our sense of the intimate and the public as well, which centered on the ways that bodies were being shared or lost, and people were being denied access to bodies. So I came up with this idea that Lynn and I would do a daily practice. Each day, one of us would upload either a still or a very short video of up to 15 seconds of one of our body parts to a Dropbox. And the task of the other one of us would be then to create sound for that. And this is the very first visual that Lynn sent me, although it was actually moving, which is obviously an elbow, and I added some sound to that. And we continued this as a daily practice, and each film was less than 15 seconds, and then the sound which the other participant added filled it. And in time, we had really some very sort of diverse types of body part and diverse sounds. And we had something of a problem, because while we were very interested in how we could create some kind of coherence out of the incoherence, in a sense, all we'd ended up with was the incoherence or the incredible kind of choppiness. There's another sort of, I think there's a more profound level to this that I certainly was dealing with, which was when the COVID crisis began. I'd very recently left Italy, where I'd been living for 2.5 years, and resettled in England. And when the situation of the amassing bodies took place in northern Italy, I was completely bewildered. The sort of truckloads of coffins were passing through the streets, and they were being piled up in churches which were otherwise sealed off. And I thought I would never see my Italian family again. And in fact, I did. But while we were working on improvised bodies, Lynn and I had a bereavement very close to me in the UK, and then I wasn't allowed access to that body. And that, I think, sort of feeds into how I remember the second half of our process here, in which we decided, in order to try to bring coherence, to work only with shadows. So the next 14 film and audio sharings that we did were projections of body parts on blank walls, so that they could be much more readily brought together into something. And we still didn't know what that was going to be. And so we ended up then with 28 films and an experiment in process. And following that, we decided to do some montages in order to try to create some short films, some sort of product. And in the next part of the talk, that's what we'd like to share. We're going to share 4 montages in which you'll actually hear combinations of sound with the image. And these have taken some editing work, of course. There's been some music compositional work, some mixing, and some quite subtle video editing as well. So Lynn is now going to share those 4 short montages. And after we've watched those, we're going to invite you to participate in some sound making. And so first of all, do enjoy these 4 bodies. I hope you can see the screen.
Kiss me quick. More. Again. Give me a kiss. A long kiss. Oh, yes. More.
I've walked through many lives, some of them my own, and I'm not who I was, though some principle of being abides, from which I struggle not to stray.
We gather and we rock. We gather and we rock the shadows. We gather and we rock the shadows of those that are gone. The shadows of those that are gone rock us. We rock. The shadows of those that are gone. The shadows of those that are gone. The shadows of those that are gone. The shadows of those that are gone.
Come to me in the silence of the night.
The shadows of
Come
those
in the speaking silence of a dream.
the shadows
Oh, memory, oh,
those that are gone.
love of finished years.
Those that are gone. Gone. Gone.
I saw them. I saw the shadows in my dreams, and I heard their silent singing.
So thanks very much for watching that with us. The next stage of this presentation, we'd like to invite you to join us, and you're going to see some visuals 3 times over, and in the second and the third times, or if you like right from the start, we'd love you to make sounds. Keep or unmute yourselves and put the microphones and put your headphones on if you can. And we're just going to collect audio responses really to the visuals. And as you do it, or as you listen and think about it, we'd love to know about whether you think this kind of practice could have a broader application, not necessarily in the sorts of rather rarefied gathering like today, but in perhaps therapeutic context or with children or in community groups. We were both struck by the strangeness of seeing our body parts from the outside and hearing them transformed by other people, and sort of enlivened by the thought that this might be entertaining or therapeutic in other spaces. So we look forward to those ideas of yours. So you're going to see a short montage 3 times, and please do join in. Thank you.
Oh. Oh. Oh.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, really, it's really lovely. Thanks so much to everyone who contributed. I think that's the end of our presentation, unless you want to say something further, then. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much. Thank you. That was wonderful to hear folks being involved in that. So just as our final presenters get themselves ready, I'll just invite any further questions for Rachel and Lynn to come in on the chat. Please do add any of the questions or comments you have. And Shelley, would you like to set up your PowerPoint? Okay, all right. So our final presentation today is given by Shelley Knotts and Charles Hutchins. Over to you, Shelley.
Hi, thanks to Music and as Process for having us. Yeah, I'm Shelley Knotts. I've recently retired from academia, so now I'm an independent researcher and artist. And Charles, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Charles Hutchins. I'm at the University of Kent.
So our talk today is called Sustainable Platforms and Curation for Network Music in the Age of Crisis, which is a little bit of a mouthful. But we're exploring this from the context of the project that we work on together, which is called the Network Music Festival. And this is a festival which we ran from 2012 till 2014 in Birmingham as an in-person festival. And this year, as there was sort of an explosion of interest in network music, yay, we decided to resurrect the festival from its zombie state, which obviously meant we had to rethink how to run it. And so we're going to talk about that today and sort of various approaches that we took. So that includes taking a mutual aid approach to the financial side of the festival, using FLOSS open source tech as much as possible, avoiding Google and Zoom and other predatory tech. I say sort of because due to time limitations, we weren't entirely able to avoid them, and how we try to expose new and emerging network practices, and how we're looking to move forward in sustainable ways.
So music tech has a long history of pointing the way forwards in what we can do technologically and as a society. So everyone knows in the history of computing that the first punch cards, which were very important in computing for many years, were invented for looms. But after they were in looms, they very quickly appeared in organs. Organs had as complicated or as more complicated ways of controlling processes and routing things as were found in looms. So musicians have always been early adopters of technology and designers and inventors of technology. So, and also music technology is a place that inventors of other things look for inspiration. So if you've ever been to the Museum of Art and Technology in Paris, you see the very first keyboards that people used for typing were musical keyboards that someone scribbled letters onto. Quickly, it was decided that maybe a more purpose-built keyboard for typing would be better. But also like gestural controllers, gestural music controllers, and game controllers have long been in dialogue where musicians invent or repurpose game technology, and game designers are grabbing inspiration from what musicians are doing. Next slide, please. And one example of this and how it can impact in social change and feminism even is Letitia Tsunami, who's a California composer, had a gestural composer called The Lady's Glove. You can see a picture of her there with a more recent version of it. Version 1 in 1991, so the very first version, was a pair of rubber kitchen gloves, which she called the Perfect Housewife's Tools. Now the parts for this, especially you can see the bend controllers on her fingers there, was from a Nintendo Power Glove, which was a game controller that was specifically marketed towards boys. It was made by the Mattel Corporation, and at that time there was a serious firewall between girls' toys and boys' toys. So the engineers who designed the gestural controller really wanted to make it gender neutral, but Mattel wasn't having it. So it was blue and covered in lightning bolts and supposed to look like some robot thing. But Tsunami was able to repurpose that as something that she could put into a specifically feminist deconstruction of it. And also, I think it's interesting in the way that we're talking about, it sort of prefigures the way that we're moving now. So the Power Glove was always meant to be used domestically as a game controller, but in the living room, in the salon, whereas she took this in the original form and pointed towards the kitchen. So it's an aspect of the domestic sphere. So, and also when she takes this out on stage, it's taking something domestic and making it public, which I think is a precursor of where we are now. Next slide, please. So when we were in lockdown, there was really a blurring of domestic and public spaces. So every concert was a house concert for the most part. This was not without precedent, including Tsunami, but also like there were neoliberal companies like SoFar, which is an app or something like an app, that would marketize house concerts pre-pandemic. So it's sort of like the Airbnb of house concerts, except that the host doesn't make any money. They just get cultural capital. And then SoFar does get capital and the musician gets paid. So this house concerts and the domestic being marketized was very much something that was happening before the pandemic hit. But as we move in the pandemic, Zoom and other technologies that we can use to communicate with each other and work are blurring the distinctions between personal and marketized or work spaces. Next slide, please. So in this milieu, we decided that it was time to resurrect the Network Music Festival. It was funny, I called Shelley and I said, I had an idea, and she said, me too, like we both had it at the same time.
People have been asking me why we weren't resurrecting the Network Music Festival, and I was just like, I don't have time. And then Les was just like, we should do it. I'm like, okay.
I was hesitant to contact her at first because it's a lot of work. But the pandemic was definitely a catalyst. Telematic music, which as you all know, is music that is performed and received in remote locations, like Eurovision. We're just like Eurovision. Telematic music was suddenly fashionable again. We had a conversation, decided that the fastest reasonable time to plan an online festival was 3 months. This turned out to be wildly ambitious, but we did actually make our launch date. Due to concerns about surveillance capitalism, we decided to try to use FLOSS, which stands for Free/Libra open source software. What this means is non-commercial software, but also non-Google. A lot of Google tools are technically released as free software, but they're not exactly free because they're spying on you. So we wanted to try and avoid solutions that were expensive or spying on their user base. Next slide, please. We also had a concern about carbon footprint, which honestly predated the festival and the pandemic. Events like the International Conference on Live Coding was already discussing a decentralized telematic solution by which they were going to have conference hubs, and then people would come together in the hub in their region and then be networked together so that we might be all watching a talk session in Detroit, even though we're in, say, Birmingham. And so you get this lessening of travel, but still getting the conference experience. I think there's a lot of legs on that idea, and hopefully people do it. Virtual solutions are not always better than travel, though. Like NFTs, which you've all heard of in the news lately, is supposed to be a solution for art fairs, but the amount of carbon that the creation of each NFT causes is like often like 10 years of someone's normal output. So NFTs are not a solution. Ad tech in general, by which I mean the banner ads and stuff that appear in your web browser and follow you around the internet, are also extremely carbon intensive. It's like 10% of network technology. It's hard to track how much energy it uses, but some estimates are extremely high. Surprisingly, though, streaming things has a relatively low carbon cost. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is that most of the network infrastructure in the UK is already running on sustainable energy. BT uses sustainable energy. And also a lot of streaming stuff is sort of relying on things that are up and running anyway. So it's like the difference between how much it costs to run a bus if you get on it versus you don't get on it. The difference between 20 and 21 passengers isn't very big. So personally streaming, we all were worried it was equivalent of like driving a car 100 miles or something, but it's more like 100 meters. So like streaming's all right. Hit the next slide, please. We're interspersing some pictures of performances. So this was the Upstage performance thing, which they did as a browser-based performance. This is a picture of us streaming it, but it actually ran in Flash on the web browser. It was one of the last Flash performances that happened before Flash was retired. Going on. So some of the issues with ad tech isn't just the carbon footprint, but the they can be kind of predatory. But they're low friction solutions. So Zoom is, I mean, we're on Zoom right now. It's really easy to set up. Everyone's already got it because the network effect. It's not hard to use. And it was already existing there as a streaming practice. And they also have the funding and experience of being accessible to disabled people. For example, it's possible to get Zoom to auto-generate captions, which is in fact an actually hard thing to do, but they've got it built in. And this is partly because of regulatory structures in the US with regards to telephony. It's not just because they decided to be appropriate, but is in fact part of a government mandated solution. But some people see Zoom as friendly and nice, but I think it's important to remember that they have acted very unethically in the past. Previous versions of Zoom installed malware on Apples to defeat the security that was built into the computer. Going on.
I think we swap back to me now. So for the Network Music Festival, we were hoping to avoid all of these kind of bad practices that happen in marketized tech spaces. So our ideals for the software that we use were that they would be accessible in terms of price, usability, and having disabled access functions in them. Have a low carbon footprint and respects the rights and privacy of users. So what platforms we actually used? So we used Big Blue Button for our workshops, which is a very nice software, which Les will talk a little bit more about, but it unfortunately requires someone to run a server for you. But once you get in there, it works very well. We used Jitsi for our teleconferencing side. We use a paid streaming service for actually streaming the performance because it was the only practical way to get around using common platforms like YouTube, which is Google, and Twitch, which is Amazon, and all the other common platforms, which are all horrible companies under the hood. Our website runs on WordPress and various plugins, which we're going to change in the future. We tried to use CryptPad for all our documents that we needed for management of the festival. Unfortunately, we had to change for some reasons for some of that. We use Riot for all the text back end, and we use Dropbox for file exchange. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of some of what that looked like, this was sort of our concert back end. So this is what I was looking at during a concert, which is Les, who's running a stage manager in the Jitsi, a text file, which was showing me what should be happening in the concert, and then our live site where I could see what concert was running and the chat, etc. And then in the other room of my house, my partner was running the streaming setup, which was a mixture of OBS for receiving and sending on streams, and but broadcast users tool, which we were using to create an audio stream. Yeah, also he had another laptop where he could see the live site to see what was actually going live, and a well-placed dog who was needing some affection. This yeah, some other parts of the festival, after every concert we had a Q&A where artists could talk about what they'd done, receive questions from the audience, and we always had a moderator for that who was sort of keeping the conversation flowing, asking pertinent questions as needed. These turned out to be quite chaotic, but sometimes in a very fun way. But yeah, sometimes when you've got 20 artists in a room and half an hour, it's quite a lot to manage. And this is Big Blue Button at one of our workshops. Yeah, so Les.
So there was a certain amount of friction in this. Big Blue Button, as Shelley mentioned, requires a server, and the server setup is super fiddly. So I didn't want to do that myself. So we partnered with a couple of other organizations to provide us with Big Blue Button. We picked two because we were worried about like crashes, but in fact it turned out to be super stable. Riot, which has renamed itself to Element because they're trying to interact investment, has serious friction on the first login process, but after that it's very easy. If you haven't heard of Riot or Element or whatever the third name of it is, it's roughly equivalent to Discord, but is a open source / I actually don't know if they're not for profit or not, since they're trying to get investments. I think there's a company in there somewhere. So I had to make instructions on how to log into it, which is not what you want. We also had some data loss with CryptPad, and that I think they fixed this because this was roughly a year ago, but it was their spreadsheet was not reliable and lost some of our data. So because our what we were keeping track of was a little bit more complicated than you would normally have in a spreadsheet, we switched to using SQL documents. But the database was big to send back and forth via Dropbox, so that also caused data loss, and we eventually switched to Google Sheets just because we could absolutely rely on it always having the right data in it. Next slide, please. Oh yeah. So we did use Google, which is an evil we failed to avoid. Not only for some of our internal stuff, but some of the WordPress plugins, which seemed to work during testing, didn't work in deployment. So when we had our open call, we asked people to submit things to a form, and the form just fell over. And so we had to switch everyone to, we switched it to Google after that. Fortunately, I don't think we lost any submissions. WordPress's Jet plugin claims to provide increased site stability and be really good, but it's in fact, it's full of spyware and is really hard to get rid of. It's still on the site. You have to, it's like one click to install, but you have to edit a bunch of backend files to get rid of it. We hope that by dropping WordPress in future versions, because WordPress has a fair amount of overhead, that we can not only get rid of Google, but also slightly reduce our carbon footprint by doing that. Next slide. So part of what we had was a social mission, but also sort of an educational mission, in that everyone wanted to do network music and we wanted to help people do that. So we had a new to networking call, which platform new and emerging network practices and new and emerging musicians. We generated a lot of materials, some of which are up on the FOSSBox, one of our sponsoring organizations. Blog has materials on how to get started with network collaboration via Jitsi Meet. We expanded and added on to documentation on how to connect to OBS, how to route audio and use Big Blue Button from different platforms. Some of this is on our website, but for example, for one of our Big Blue Button partners, we did extensive additions to their own documentation about how to do audio routing with Big Blue Button, which is now available to everyone who uses that free platform. We offered tech support on how to stream to our particular provider. Had lots of tutorials. A lot of people had they knew how to do it in theory, but they didn't know how to do it in practice. And I'm very proud to say that we got every single group except for one, which are these two guys with original buklas that were trying to figure out how to stream, and we couldn't manage to talk them through it. But next time we will get them on.
Yeah, we just more or less ran out of time there. Yeah, and a lot of our documentation came out of those conversations as well with practitioners of like, okay, we've got this document, what do we need to add to it, which will help the next person.
So there was also this idea of mutual aid, which included people helping us. I mean, I don't want to say it's a one-way conversation, but people helping each other get online, and this this idea of like helping empower musicians, but also of financial mutual aid. So we didn't sell tickets. We asked people for voluntary donations, which we called ticket income, and we got some funding from the Mimic project. All of our ticket income and some of our funding that didn't go towards back-end costs was distributed to artists. So we didn't make any profit on this. Not that you would anyway on this kind of event, but all the money that came in either went out to tech providers or went to the artists. This was really a strong ideological basis of what we wanted to do, mutual aid, but the ticket income was lower than we hoped. It was really hard to predict how many people were going to watch or even how many people were going to submit to the call, because it was quite early on in the pandemic and we really had no idea what interest was going to be like.
Sorry, we have 4 minutes left, so I think maybe we should just on to a couple of other things. So another one of our considerations with the festival was time zones. So we originally sort of envisaged running a 24-hour festival because, yeah, time zones are a huge accessibility concern where entire regions are sometimes disadvantaged from attending and performing at events. I know this very well from having lived in Australia for a year when you always have to do things in the middle of the night. But yeah, so we addressed, obviously, as 3 people running a festival, we couldn't stay up all night for 4 days straight. So we addressed this by having international partners. So we had partners such as Top Lap Mexico, who both helped us to expand our network into distant local communities. So we're often relying on our own networks for marketing, but obviously if they're running an event, that helped to sort of expand who was accessing it just because they have their networks as well. And we also had a partner in Colombia, and we had some presenters who were based in Australia, and I can't remember where else off the top of my head, but essentially we had people involved in the festival in very distant places to help us run part of it, and that's a model that we would want to expand on in future, and give some more responsibility over to those international partners. And another thing that was great that came out of this was just also incorporating broader practices. So for example, Top Lap Mexico ran this amazing VR Algorave where you could go in as an avatar and watch a Algorave, which was super cool. From the accessibility perspective, telematic music in itself addresses some accessibility concerns because we're able to reach people who would otherwise be unable to attend concerts for various reasons. We had a low-cost pay-what-you-feel model. We also had an audio-only stream for people who had slower internet connections, and the whole back end was text-based and multilingual. So, for example, one of the concerts was run mostly in Spanish, and we also had a German-speaking back-end person. Captioning is sort of an ongoing concern. We didn't manage to get to that from an open source perspective for this festival, but we'd be looking at the next festival at incorporating that. So if anyone knows of open source softwares that do captioning, we would be really happy to hear about it. So the future of the festival, we want to build our own content management system to handle the back end of the festival, because there just aren't open source tools which will do what we need them to do. And this is something that we'd like to contribute to the tech ecosystem. We're going to move away from WordPress so that we can eliminate some more Google from the web platform, and develop our live site, which Holger very awesomely developed for us in like the matter of about 2 weeks for this festival. So those are sort of ongoing things that will happen by the next time. We're researching other streaming solutions, because the one that we did was sort of unsustainably expensive, but it's kind of tricky because of performance rights and other matters. Developing stronger international partnerships in non-European time zones. The all encompassing problem of every arts event: we need more money and more time. Or we definitely need more than 3 months, that's for sure. And we also want to look at hybrid contexts. So beyond the pandemic, how can we both have like the intimacy of the concert space with the accessibility and diverse audiences of the Telematic Festival? I think I'm entirely out of time, but I don't know. If there's any
go on, Shelley, one last thing.
Yeah. And so yeah, I guess like the lessons of COVID, moving online was a necessity and also a driver for the reincarnation of the NMF. We gained an ability to reach a broad audience at the expense of the concert space, but in the rush to telematics, what we don't want to do is take the apparently easiest solutions, because they're not necessarily the most sustainable and the most ethical. And so, yeah, there's a need to sort of reevaluate the adaptations that we've made in the last year to see if they're useful, empowering, and have the right trade-offs for users. And that's some conclusions. I think I won't say them.
Thank you. Nice sneaky way to end there. Thank you to both of you, Shelley and Charles. Feel quite honourable work with the festival. Lots to chew through there. I'm still getting over the fact that I've never thought of Eurovision as telematics writ large. It seems so obvious now. So thank you for that. For everyone else, please do add in any questions that you've got in the chat for Shelley and Charles. But we will continue. So I said before, we've got a deadline of 4 o'clock for the Q&A. So I apologise in advance for having to be somewhat brisk with these questions, but we'll be able to get through all 4 groups. So let's cast our minds back to the beginning of the session. Seán and Andy, everyone might like to switch at the top right-hand corner of the screen. You might like to switch to gallery view, which is a little bit more friendly for the Q&A. So Seán and Andy, are you there?
We are here, yeah.
Marvelous. What I'll do is I'll paste in some questions from before. So thanks for your presentation.
That's right.
So a question from Grant. Oh yeah, and Seán and Andy have given away the fact that they were in the same room all along. So Grant says, a question to you both: to what extent do you think that the repetitive element, as well as the other aspects of performance, make perhaps an incident that might go unnoticed as something material and significant?
Yeah, do you want to answer that?
I don't know, something you would.
Okay. Was there anything well, no, because that's going to answer, it's going to open a can of worms. I think like any kind of repetition obviously draws attention to something, whether it's significant or insignificant. And I think the more something's repeated, the more you might see it from different angles or hear it from different perspectives, or things like that. With this, I suppose the repetition occurs both in the format of the text and also some of the gestures, I suppose, but there's never exact repetition. I don't think there's any exact repetition, but
but there is in one section where we acknowledge it.
Oh,
as well.
yeah.
We would express and something we didn't really get time to talk about in the presentation was the fact that we were becoming quite self-aware in our tweeting. So for instance, I made some comment in the tweets, and Seán echoed those comments and then said sort of the lady in red is the repetition section of this piece. So we're sort of becoming aware of the compositional process there and acknowledging that there was repetition a little bit. And then I suppose with the word getting repeated over and over again, it kind of became a recurring motif in the piece. So there were elements that we were aware of,
yeah,
in that way.
To answer the question, yes, repetition can make something insignificant seem more significant. I think, we think, possibly.
Good. Every good question has a single word answer. Thank you for that. I'll paste in a nice long. It's a comment and question from Catherine. Question for you both. Really enjoyed this presentation. Really lovely work. The processes and approaches to content are so interesting. I'm wondering about what might seem superficially to be a contrast between the approach to found or live materials and the public composition process. And the fact that when we watch the extract, it feels very composed, put together, it's recorded, it's filmed, to some extent an effect of the media, but not just. I wonder how this relates to your approach to live performance work, and how you think of the relation between performance versus the need or choice to disseminate via video.
Great question. Andy.
Well, yeah, I suppose the documentation that we showed was created afterwards, and it was a polished version of the live performance. I suppose the live performance itself, where the text would have just been appearing in the chat, so other people's comments would have come in and kind of made it a little messy in that sense, which was good and which was welcomed. I also remembered that I'd actually improvised a lot of the speech from the spoken part during the performance. I kind of went off script, but I like that element in the live performance that it wasn't just, we weren't just doing something on the internet that we could have just pre-prepared. There was a essential live element to it. About the need to create polished documentation, it's a really good question. I still haven't found a suitable answer, really. I don't know. I feel that I just feel like there's a need to kind of make some kind of definitive document or something. In my own work, usually things will be performed 3 times. I usually do 3 iterations of a work before I'm happy with it, and then creating a document kind of fixes it. In this sense, I think we were quite happy with it this first time, and then the documentation sort of fixed what we'd done in that sense. But do feel free to disagree. Sure.
No, I mean, I think, yeah, I go along with that, what Andy said. For me, I suppose the documentation solidifies the work in a way, which is maybe not the best thing to say at a conference about process. But yeah, I mean, the documentation becomes a kind of object at the end of a quite extended process.
It's a little bit like if you do a charcoal drawing and then you spray it with hairspray in order to fix it. So it's like making the documentation is like the fixative in a way, because then, yeah, I think it's now influenced the way that we would perform the piece again.
Yeah.
But no, it's a really good question. It really, I think I'll be using and thinking about that for a while. So no, thanks so much for that.
We were talking about it earlier on, actually, before we did the presentation, about the kind of things being polished and not being polished. And yeah, we didn't really come down either way. One of my problems is I don't come down on anything. I'll just be, both approaches are good. So yeah, it's, I think, yeah, somewhere in between being completely polished and something more open or more kind of process based is what we're interested in.
Thanks. And Catherine says thanks for that. And at the end of her question, of course, it's about how I suppose points to how this might have developed outside of the pandemic context and how it's been shaped by that. In a parallel universe, we will continue that conversation. Unfortunately, we have to get to time. So thanks both to Seán and Andy. I'm going to move on to Andrea now. Andrea, thanks for the performance, and to the other 3 performers. Here is a question from Peter Nagel in the chat for you, Andrea. That was excellent. Oh, and I should also say, Andre, you had a lot of admirers. Many comments coming through saying that they really, really enjoyed it.
Nice.
Peter says, I'm really impressed with how you embrace the lo-fi sound of the platform. It would be interesting to hear about the aesthetic process of that.
What would aesthetic process mean in this context?
Well, Peter might like to come in as well, but I wonder
okay,
if
I'll just try to. Okay, but I am. Okay, so 1-bit sound is very interesting to me because on such a low resolution, different tone intervals result in different tone colors, which you don't have in hi-fi sound. So connecting different parameters of music somehow leads to thinking of one source of all what is happening. So I think that's probably my thinking behind it. Also, so the melody that you hear is actually in two voices that always move in parallel fifths or parallel octaves. That's of medieval inspiration. So yeah, these were probably my thoughts. I would also add that 1-bit sound works well with a natural tuning rather than with a tempered tuning. So in terms of getting different colors, and although the sound system is extremely simple, being based on 1-bit sound, it actually can produce different and interesting sound colors.
I think we'd certainly all agree with that. It was far from simple. So as I understand you, from the concept, right from the concept level, you intend to work with low resolution sound.
Yeah,
that's good. Okay, I'm gonna tap in another question here from Steve Gisby, who asks whether you could talk us through some of the numbers. This is in the interface you were presenting to us.
Right. Okay, so actually the as players, we only have, let's say, white keys in 2 octaves. So as if you had like a really small keyboard without black keys. However, white keys are not tuned as white keys are tuned normally on a normal piano in a tempered scale, but it is a scale that is based on the smallest fractions that you can get when you want to tune every tone only towards the basic tone, so that you have so that no tone has a dissonance in connection with the bass tone. So you get some kind of Arabic or scale like that, which is very irregular. So this is the only scale that we use. So spread on 2 octaves, that amounts to only 15 tones. And these are written with numbers from 0 to 14. So each of us has a small screen on the phone with a kind of a histogram where you can move the tone up or down. And how is the compound melody made of individual melodies? Well, imagine there are 4 stacks of cards and you mix them like stacks of cards. So first tone from me, first tone from second player, and so on, and then second tone from everyone, and then the third, and so on. And each one of us has 4 tones, no more nor less. So there are 16 tones at any given time in every loop.
Andrea, it occurs to me that there'll be some people who are wondering if they can get a hold of the interface. Is it available anywhere?
The software.
Yes. Yeah,
you can download the software from my website. It's a zip file containing the documentation, how to install, how to run it. You would need, okay, so if you with your friends play in the same house, okay, so there is a program on each of the devices, which is basically a web page. So you would probably have to host the web page yourself, because you need you need these web pages, and you need the central server program to run somewhere. Now, if you are in one house, you can run it on your own laptop, but otherwise, if you are in different places, you have to run it on a public server. So the software is completely available with the documentation. And if anything is unclear, you can write to me.
Thank you. Alistair's posted the Alta Vista website. Is that the right one?
Yeah, but also yeah. Oh, it went into private. Sorry, I'm not very used to Zoom.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Don't worry. Yeah, you can always type it in after the Q&A as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm expecting the low hum of 1-bit tones to emerge from the UK later this evening. So let's have a go, folks. One more question to you, Andrea, from Alistair, who asks, are the bubble visuals, and I think he's referring to the coloured circles, are they just for decoration, or are they a visualization of the sound in some way?
They are a visualization of sound in a slight way, meaning that the number, okay, so as you might have noticed that actually the piece has sections, so that in each section, so as I said, we have 15 notes only, but not all the notes are available in each section. So we have a button to move to the next section where the computer proposes only a subset of those 15 notes. So inside some points where you might have only 2 notes to work with, or 3 or 4. So the number of colors, the number of randomly chosen colors for the bubbles equals the number of available tones. And that's all. I actually thought in the beginning to connect the tones that you can hear with the colors, so that the colors correspond somehow to tones, but I ended up being happy with this as is. So the answer is that it is partly a decoration, mostly a decoration, and in a small way it does also the speed of the bubbles also mirrors the speed of the music. So yeah, in some small ways it does follow the music.
Right, thank you, Andrea. Thank you for clarifying that. Alistair, you were right, good hunch. So thank you so much, Andrea, for those responses. And we will move swiftly on to Rachel and Lynn.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Andrea. Apologies again, everyone that was sort of just have to cycle through these. So Rachel and Lynn, I'm going to post in, it's quite a long but really reflective comment and question from Catherine Laws. So Catherine says, such striking and poignant work, thank you. Clearly the collaboration was in some ways a result of and response to the pandemic, or at least some of its effects. But do you think you would have worked this way, i.e. remotely sending things back and forth with the daily input, had you been collaborating in normal times? Maybe it seems a silly question. No, it's not a silly question, Catherine. Maybe this work would simply not have happened, but I'm interested in the extent to which the process is necessarily this paradoxical one of close collaboration at a distance over networks. Aside from being necessary in lockdown, it seems to facilitate certain kinds of active output, or would that have happened whether in person or not? What are your responses?
We can't hear you.
I always forget to turn on my mic. I'm sure it wouldn't have happened, but we're exploring whether it might. So I think one of the things that was special was the daily practice. So it was like a sort of a visual diary or a sound diary, and then, but that doesn't mean that it has to happen like that in the future. So it's a model for a workshop, perhaps.
If you can just turn up your mic a bit, Rachel, sorry to interrupt.
All right, sorry, did you hear me or
yeah, we did, but it's better now.
Okay, yeah.
Well, Rachel and I live in 2 different cities. Rachel lives in London and I in Edinburgh. So, I mean, this collaboration has to be done remotely. And I'm not sure, I mean, before Rachel approached me, it never occurred to me that we will be collaborating. And I think the lockdown also has heightened our sense of need to connect with other people. And this daily exchange really has helped us to connect. And also to me, it feels like it is a reflection of the process of how we get to know another person, or how I get to know Rachel, bits by bits, fragments, and then including combining within their imagination to construct what kind of person she is, and she also in reverse construct who I was. Yeah. So
I also was struck by you can do a certain type of communication in this way that you don't, in a way it's easier. It's contained, you send a picture, you don't need to say anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if people, needing to communicate but not necessarily wanting to communicate in a straight way, to create explanations, or it could be a facilitating way of helping people communicate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to, Catherine says thank you. Just post in a couple of comments. I don't think these are necessarily questions that came through during your presentation. Alistair, I think in response to the participatory aspect, said my experience of the playthrough was the imagery is really evocative and slow moving and goes a long way to inviting sound. Grant said, beautiful works in their own right as works of art. I assume he means visual art. I would have thought it could work as an introduction to a series of plays presented on TV. Thank you.
Thank you.
Those are some comments that came through. I have one quick question which I'll copy in. Because I'm always in these kind of processes, I'm always interested in what goes into deciding what gets sent through in the first place. I think I've phrased this slightly strangely, but when generating the image of a body part, what considerations or decisions are you dealing with? What are you having to think through with regard to it being used for the generation of musical material? And did those decisions that you were making change as the process continued?
I think to start with, on my part anyway, I was thinking more like individual. I mean, there isn't really much coherence in between all the images, the visuals and the sounds, and really thinking of individual imagery and individual sound. But I think as we were working on the shadows, in my mind, there's more trying to achieve a kind of coherence. So I was responding not only to the image that, or the body, or the shadow that Rachel has uploaded, but I was also thinking in terms of when I make a sound, I was thinking also how it might relate to the sounds that have already been produced. Yeah, and so it does, the process of deciding what image to use and what sound to use did change over time. And so as a result, the first part of the body part seems to be more fragmentary compared to the shadows. Yeah, I don't know whether that's your Rachel's.
Yeah, I had the same experience. And of course, we weren't talking to each other in this period, but we did talk to each other after 14 days, after 14 films, and then we decided to take a different approach. I think at the beginning, I was more concerned of how are we going to build a complete body. So this idea that we needed to have every body part somehow there. And then how do you do certain body parts? There are certain body parts you might not want to show, actually. And then, yeah, so there are the sorts of more inhibiting aspects of the body. In a way, you know, so there's all that, the sort of embarrassment of the body as well.
Yeah. And I wasn't really thinking, I mean, the question also asked whether when we were deciding on the body part, whether we took into consideration whether they're useful for the generation of musical material. I didn't think in that way. I mean, probably because I'm not a musician, I didn't come from that sort of background. And also I think you can use any sound you want to any body parts, yeah. But for me, there is also this element of the body being the site of memories, memories of sound, memories of also past experience. And so sometimes I choose a body part which can make me think of some meaningful experience as well. Yeah.
I think the shock for me was Lynn's first body part, which was an elbow, which I couldn't think of a less musical part of a body that she could have chosen. And I was like, what am I going to do with that?
Yeah.
Let's not get into categorizing musicality, efficacy of different body parts. Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you, Lynn and Rachel. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you for your insightful responses. Okay, and let's move on now finally to Shelley and Charles. I'm aware, I think that there's been a side conversation going on between Shelley and Neil, so that's fine. That's good. Thanks for your presentation. The nuances of sustainability in the virtual realm, they were very important nuances that we all need to know much more about. I think that was really significant. I actually had a much more sort of almost banal question. I'm just interested in how the programming of artists, did you go about that in the same way as you did before? Were there differences? Maybe there were only differences afterwards that you were able to reflect on.
It was kind of the same. I mean, we've always had this problem with the Network Music Festival of like putting out an open call, not thinking that people would be very interested, and then ending up with like way too many like super interesting performances and somehow having to narrow that down. I think we didn't mention actually in our presentation the scale of the festival, so we had like 70 performances over 4 days, so it was like huge and totally unmanageable and totally unwieldy. And I think like one of the things that we hadn't quite factored in time-wise for this festival in particular, which is different to the previous ones, was just how much time we would have to spend or less would have to spend teaching people how to do streaming, which like, you know, was a great process, and like I think a super good legacy of the festival as well. But Les literally spent like weeks, I think, in Jitsi calls, like teaching people how to connect to OBS.
It wasn't that much, but when I was doing remote teaching this last term, it turned out that I just rewrote all my classes to use this material. So it turned out to be useful for my students as well.
Ah, well, that's practice into pedagogy. Excellent. Alistair says, is there, let me paste it in, he's keen. He's saying, is there a call for works, papers for the next Network Music Festival? And when? He's not asking whether, he's saying when has the next festival been scheduled for?
The short answer is it hasn't. The long answer is I think off the back of the previous festival, it was great, and we're glad that it happened. But I think we also kind of need some time to think about how to run the festival more sustainably, because we're essentially 2 people running a full-scale festival on very shoestring budgets. And like last year, I was doing it as part of my academic position, and I no longer have an academic position, and Les was doing it not as part of his academic position but around his academic work. So, and you know, we also got funding from the research project that I was working on, so you know, the money and time issue is something that we need to think about for the next one, and also how we can scale back the festival in some ways and maybe focus more so that artists are getting paid properly, and so we're able to manage it. And yeah, so there's a lot of thinking that we need to do essentially before we run the next festival, and also Les needs to build a whole new website, so yeah.
But Alistair is very welcome to come on board and help us run the next one as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're always open to partners and accomplices. So if anyone wants to help us with the next festival, you're very welcome.
Well, you know, the University of Wolverhampton, we taught on Big Blue Button all last year. It's actually quite a good. It's quite a good platform, actually. I'm kind of surprised that more places didn't seem to use it. One really final quick question. I asked about programming, but in terms of the audience or the experiences, how they interacted. Again, was there any difference with it being obviously a much more common way of interacting in terms of performance since last March? Did you notice any difference, or again, was it sort of similar to previous iterations?
Our previous iterations were only in person. There was no streaming. I mean, there were some performances that were streamed, but it was to a venue, so we didn't have an online audience. And so, yeah, this time the audience interaction was through the text chat. And we kind of had some various ideas about creating some more social spaces within the festival, but we just literally didn't have time to implement them and to go through with that. So I think that would be something we would be looking more at, and looking at models other people have used for facilitating those ad hoc interactions that you might have when you stand at a bar and someone comes up and starts talking to you about your performance. I don't know how to do those things online, because there's always a formality to online interactions that you don't necessarily have in real life. So
our festival came very quickly after another thing called Art Meets Radical Openness, which is this great festival that happens every other year in Austria. And they attempted a bunch of things to create these sort of online interactions that Shelley was talking about. And their attempts, I was paying a lot of attention to, and they made great efforts, and I'm not having a go at them, but they were largely unsuccessful. So part of what was an issue is that we didn't have a great model anywhere to copy, but I think that what did work very successfully actually was the VR algo raves. In that partially because I wasn't working at them, I was just, they were run by partner organizations, so I was able to be there as an audience, but I witnessed people having normal conversations with each other. And I had a really wonderful thing where I saw Yaksu across a room. So this experience of there's someone I know over there, I can go walk over to them. I mean, absolutely a virtual, not real interaction, but a very real sense of something that would happen in real life. So I feel like these VR, especially semi-VR spaces like hubs, have really a lot of potential.
Yeah, and I think there's a bunch of those things that have kind of appeared over the last year that didn't exist when we did the festival. But I mean, yeah, I guess that would take some assessment process to work out which ones people enjoy and which ones people don't.
Yeah, but there's so many fruitful avenues you can go down. So there's a real vibrant future ahead for you guys. So, I mean, well done for pulling it off again last year, you know, in the face of not having any time. Some commitment on both of your part. Alistair has put in a link in the chat for the Radical Openness Festival that Charles just mentioned. Thank you, Shelley and Charles. Thank you very much. And to all our presenters for this fantastic session. Lots of interesting things to think about.